Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being with me on this journey. I am Diana Pova, business coach, and today my special guest is Alex Friesen. Alex is a life coach and self-described metaphysical detective. His journey in personal development started 17 years ago. He is committed to helping people develop strong minds, find inner peace and purpose, and remove limiting beliefs and negative emotions that hold them back in their lives. Alex uses a combination of positive mental attitude psychology, NLP, and pulls wisdom from ancient, esoteric, and occult sources, as well as some of the more mainstream thinkers of today. Alex's focus is making the world a better place by making you a better person, whatever that means to you. Welcome, Alex. Thank you so much for being today with me.
And thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am honored, and I am looking forward to learning more from you. And I'm going to jump straight away into our first question. If you can tell us more about your story and how you started on this path of helping other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that it started somewhere around the time I got to college, where I started to see myself as a bit more of an intellectual and everything. And I remember my first reading week, and it turned into, what am I going to do with my time off? I don't want to sit around watching TV and all that kind of stuff. And I figured documentaries are a good way to go, and documentaries just kind of seemed a little bit boring or whatever. And it leaned a little bit into conspiracy theories. And it started off as, how crazy are these people? And then it was kind of, okay, they actually had a couple of valid points. So I got a little bit into that rabbit hole for a while, realized that all it was doing to my mental attitude was just making me see the world through a very negative filter. But along the way, I learned a lot of things about like esoteric philosophies, occult ideas and stuff like that, which the word just means hidden. It's just a word that's meant to scare people so they don't look into it. There's a lot of
Exactly.
Wow, right? So fast forward another 5 or 10 years, that really put me into the personal development path. Somewhere in my mid-20s, I had issues with drinking and everything, and I ended up, long story short, just breaking my heel. And that's a very painful injury that left me bedridden for about 2 months. Couldn't move, couldn't do anything. So basically all I had was myself, my laptop, and the internet. And I was lucky enough at that time to discover The Secret and Brian Tracy and learning some of those ideas. And that ended up really giving me even more of a broader path, and a lot more avenues open up for me, and ways of helping my self-esteem, and understanding that where I'm at doesn't need to be where I stay. And even though at the time I felt very limited in what I could do with my life, I realized that through changing the way that I thought and the way that I looked at things, my perspective, and all these different aspects, and where I directed my focus, my life could be very different if I were just to pick a path, stick to it, and try to find something with some meaning. So from there, I just decided that I wanted to help other people learn the things that I learned, and kind of understand that no matter where you are in your life, it really doesn't matter. If you want to change and you're committed to making that change, anything is possible as long as you're willing to put in the work and the time.
I fully agree with you. Thank you so much, Alex. Can you tell us more about what means esoteric and the metaphysical detective? Because I think these are words that we don't necessarily hear them every day, and maybe we are not aware of them.
Yeah, okay, sure. So esoteric is similar to the occult, where it's just like hidden knowledge that's been kept away from the mainstream, where back, earlier days, the ruling classes, they didn't want people to even know how to read, because they knew if inside of all the literature and all that, there is the wisdom of the past, and therefore it might disturb the system of power or whatever. It might threaten the people on top. If the other people knew that we're all just as powerful as them, that information has just been kept from it. So learning things like Hermeticism, and going into ideas like the New Thought movement and the Unity movement, which are kind of Christian leaning, but very metaphysical teachings and thought systems that really kind of explain the psychology behind the Bible and all that, where we're not talking in a literal sense. We're saying that each character, it represents a part of the psyche. and there are different ways of understanding it. And when you read it from that perspective, it suddenly becomes a lot more practical and useful for day-to-day use, and opens up the ability to create a greater understanding of your consciousness, of your awareness, the power of love and acceptance and forgiveness, and all these great mental laws, and really just breaking it down and opening it up so that we have so many more options for our day-to-day lives to, live together in better harmony, more peace between each other, and just general happiness, joy, and service to others overall. So that's kind of my understanding of what the esoteric part of it means, because if you go back like thousands of years, Hermeticism comes from Hermes, which was also known from the the Egyptian god Thoth, and he was the keeper of the wisdom and all. And so all of these things, quantum physics and science, is just seeming to catch up with today. These ideas that have been around for thousands of years, but they've kind of been, scoffed at because people are saying like, oh, this is just old stuff, that this was just some hocus pocus way of explaining things that they didn't understand. But we're just now catching up through, like I said, things like quantum physics that are understanding that a lot of what they were saying was right. It was just from our modern day understanding of things, the two haven't really made sense until we understood things like the observer effect, the double slit, and all those ideas. And as far as a metaphysical detective goes, that's a term I created myself, where if you think of like a private detective, they go around and they investigate, and they're kind of spying on the people that they've been hired to check. In this situation, as a metaphysical detective, what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm spying on the ego. So if I have a client, I'm kind of checking in to see their thought patterns, their speech patterns, understanding the way that their perspective, and just kind of the way that they use their attitude, the way that they see the world, to help them better understand that because of the way that they're perceiving things, they're really doing themselves a disservice, and it's really detrimental to their own happiness and their ability to enjoy life and hurting their relationships. Because the more you can be in love with yourself in a healthy way, the better you are to be for everyone else around you. All of those important relationships in your life are only gonna be better if you get better along the way. And you're doing that in a healthy perspective, right? So I kind of think of it as like, I also like to say like a neural ninja, because ninja is just like Japanese for spy, but the whole idea is you need to stay out of the light of the ego, because the ego will resist and push back. And I start calling you out on some of your things, even if I'm doing it from a place of trying to help, the ego doesn't want to hear that necessarily. So it'll push back. So I've got to kind of figure out clever ways of sneaking in the shadows and moving around the ego, so I can keep my clients staying neutral and objective, and really understand that this isn't a personal attack. I'm just saying from an energetic level, if you continue saying, why does this always happen to me? Why is my life so horrible? Why do I have such bad luck or whatever? Well, that's your reticular activating system, like your law of attraction muscle. That's what's going to keep drawing in. It's like searching Google, why does my life suck? Google isn't there. Google is neutral, right? So it's kind of like the idea of planting the seed. But when you hit search on why does my life suck, Google is going to bring you back millions of reasons why your life isn't going the way it is. But had you asked instead, how can I make my life better? What is the best way for me to improve? Where are areas in my life that I need to focus on in order to create more joy, happiness, freedom, whatever it may be for you that means improvement. But when you start changing those little things, just taking that little point of view and just kind of turning it from here to over here, you start seeing new angles and new ways of coming at your situations and finding new solutions to your challenges.
This is fascinating. Thank you so much, Alex. I love listening to you and learning as well, because I didn't know all of this. And I would like to ask you, how do we do all of this? Because you mentioned that you are a spy, you as a coach for your clients. Can we actually do it on our own to identify when something is happening to us and to become our own spy?
Yes, absolutely. So a while back, a few years ago, I was doing stand-up comedy as well. And I learned a really great writing exercise where you do a two-way conversation with yourself. So you just get a pen, a piece of paper, and basically you just start off with whatever you're feeling Or you just ask yourself, how are you feeling? One version of you asks the questions, the other one answers them, and that's it. That's the only thing that the two are allowed to do. So in the comedy perspective, you could do it as a critic or your biggest fan. Obviously, if we're going from a health, like a mental health and personal development sense, then we should probably be going from the side of the fan or the cheerleader, or maybe like if you think of it as channeling your higher self, because deep down inside of all of us, we all have all the answers, and no one's gonna have a better answer than you will, because you know your own issue and challenge and situation the best, right? Because I can only assume what your problem is, only you know what it is for sure. So if I were to say, I'm not feeling so great, or I'll start off with me as the answer, or like the statements or whatever, right? So it'd be like, I'm not feeling so great today. Oh, why do you think that is? Well, because this reason and this reason and this reason. Okay, and how does that make you feel? So you're kind of doing therapy with yourself, but basically all you do is every time you get an answer, you question that answer. So why is that important? How do I do that? Why is that? Like, just anything that comes up, you just question your answer. And you just continue doing it. I have one, I call it the lawyer exercise if you're trying to find purpose, right? So if you say, somebody walks up to you and says, what do you want to do with the rest of your life as far as a career goes? If you're unsure, if you're thinking about making a change in your life, and you say, you caught me a little bit off guard, I'm actually not sure. They're like, okay, no problem. I got this covered for you. Then you're going to be a lawyer. But I don't want to be a lawyer. And they say, well, why don't you want to be a lawyer? Well, it's too much schooling and everything like that. And then you might ask yourself, is it too much schooling, or is it something that you're disinterested in? And that's maybe what the difference is. So you can go back and say, well, I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that you mention it, I suppose if I were to go back to school for something that I was more interested in, maybe the time wouldn't matter so much. Okay, then what would you be more interested in? So you find your answer and then you question it. So you're always constantly digging deeper. So I also call it like digging for goals. For gold. So yeah, you're using your thinking as like a mental shovel to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper until you find the hidden treasure that's lying underneath years of repressed emotions, or just the things that you're afraid to look at. And it's somewhere between shadow work and kind of like self-help therapy.
Doesn't it sound a bit crazy to start talking to yourself? I know that I am doing this very often when I have a down moment and I am doubting myself, and like I have all these little voices in my head, and I am like, I am not good enough, or I don't know how to do this. And then I catch myself saying this, and I'm like, no, you don't believe this. And then I switch. So I know that whenever I am in the negative pattern, I know that I have to do the opposite of what my mind is telling me. If I am afraid of something and I say, no, I cannot do that, then I am going to do it because I know that this is what is going to get me out of that. But I know that for me, what works very well, there is the talking part, but there is also the action part, because it gets me out of my own, self, or whatever is happening inside myself. Do you think there is any other method we can apply once we identified what's happening and once we had this dialogue with ourselves? What is the next step?
From there, I would say, so what you were talking about there, I think is a lot to do with limiting beliefs. And your limiting beliefs are a lot to do, again, with your ego. So you need to switch from the ego to the observer. Because when you catch yourself, that's when you're in the observer, you're in the objective mode, where you're just saying, I can't do this. Like, wait a minute. Is that me talking, or is that my ego trying to keep me in that, like that rigid little box there that doesn't want to escape outside of their comfort zone because it's scary? You're comfortable where you're at, even if where you're at isn't great. It's kind of thing where a new chair might be better, but the old one is more comfortable, even though it's falling apart and there's holes and it smells terrible and like that. But it's comfortable, it's familiar, and we have all these things. But every once in a while, there's the idea that if you're trying to get out of your comfort zone, too much is intimidating and actually can have detrimental results in the long run. Or if you were to do it incrementally, little bits at a time, small habits, changing 1 to 3 to 5% outside of your comfort zone can really be a helpful way of doing that. Just because it's something that, even though it's outside your comfort zone, it's not so far outside your comfort zone that it's going to be too intimidating. You can at least get started. And even if you get finished, you can get some feedback. You can show it to a few people and be like, hey, what do you think about that? And then they'll come back to you and be like, I really like this part. Maybe you could try doing this over here. And as you do that, instead of taking it personally and worrying about how people might be judging you and everything like that, you can work a little bit outside your comfort zone, but still in a safe way, but still get that feedback and all that new information that you can use to improve yourself. And like, that's the best way that you can kind of fail forward. And I think that's what they mean when they say that.
Thank you so much, Alex. Absolutely. I really appreciate your time and I appreciate what you are telling us. What is actually a framework that you are applying with your clients? I know that it can depend on the situation, but do you have something specific you are focusing on, and what is the path they are taking with you?
So a good amount of the time, what I'm really working on is kind of retraining people how to think. We go to school and we learn how to remember and like regurgitate knowledge. But for the most part, what we learned in high school, college, grade school, with the exception of, basic spelling, writing, math, reading, all these things that we kind of use on a day-to-day basis, the majority of the stuff just kind of falls through the cracks, and you probably retained maybe 15 to 20% of what you actually learned in school. So retraining the brain how to think, or training it for the first time, because like I said, there's a difference between learning how to regurgitate and, kind of being a good worker versus being an independent and critical thinker. So a lot of the times what I'm trying to do is help people understand what meditation really is. And I think a lot of the time people, they believe that meditation and mindfulness are the same thing. And mindfulness is, like you were saying, catching yourself before and being aware. And that's turning off the ego and coming from the objective self that understands that I have more options than this. I just haven't been choosing them. And even if you've just been allowing your choices to be made for you, you're still choosing to allow that. So even not making a choice is still a choice. So in this situation, I try to help people understand that the way that you think and your ability to meditate on a thought. So the idea of meditating on a thought is, if you think of like, when they say food for thought, meditation is how you chew the food. Right?
Okay.
Chewing on your thoughts through meditation. So the longer you think about a single subject, especially if you have a pen and paper and write down your thoughts and really get it down on paper and see it in front of you, where it becomes manifested into a physical representation, even if it's just through words and ink on paper, it still becomes a little bit more tangible and a little bit more real. And you also kind of like, you're squeezing like dirty water out of a sponge. You're getting those ideas out of your head. So it's kind of like giving yourself like a mental bath as well. So when you're meditating on an idea, all you're really doing is you're focusing on it and you're trying to expand your understanding of it. That's what they mean by raise your consciousness, by expanding your consciousness. All you're doing is you're removing the fear of saying that, oh, this is the only way it can be done. By meditating on something and expanding it, you're like, well, is that true? Or am I just looking at it through a closed mind? So as you meditate on something, you start to get new ideas and saying that, or maybe I could do it this way, or maybe I could talk to somebody else. Maybe there's a book I could learn. And you start getting more and more ideas. And the more ideas you get and you act on, the more you're going to further expand your consciousness and your awareness. You're going to move away from fear and further into like the vibration of love, where the idea of fear and love, I think, is fear is just a limited belief and how limited you are in your thinking. Love opens you up. And that's where they say like fear retracts, love expands. So love expands your ideas and your ability to kind of think clearly and to find solutions. When you're constantly thinking in fear, you're just saying, oh my God, why did I do that? Why? Oh, they're never going to talk to me again. I'm such a horrible person. But again, the more you're programming your mind to understand that, the more you're just going to keep repeating it over and over. But if instead like you said before, you catch yourself, you say, no. Instead, let's think this through, let's talk this through. So what I'm trying to do with my clients is help them change their thought patterns, where they're no longer saying, oh no, I can't do this, I've screwed up, and just wasting all that time and energy being blocked by their fears. We're trying to get them to open up to the vibration of love, to raise their consciousness, and then develop self power and inner courage, and cultivate all these like positive emotions, feelings, states of mind, and then that will bleed out into other areas of your life, like your relationship. If you like yourself and you respect yourself more, you're going to love yourself too much to constantly eat McDonald's and pizza and all of those things like every meal. Don't get me wrong, I still love eating, less healthy than I should, but for the most part, I try to eat, good fresh vegetables, like healthy proteins and all that sort of thing. But at the same time, I still want to be able to treat myself from time to time. But I've now developed from drinking, 20 to 30 drinks a day when I was really in a low point in my life and really not liking who I was as a person. I've learned to find that self-love in a healthy way and not an egotistical, not an arrogant way, just saying that I'm just as worthy as anybody else, just by pure right of being a human being. That's all you really need in order to be worthy. The problem is most people forget that, or they're afraid to admit it because so many people in their lives have told them that that's not true, that's not the way it is, because they grew up a certain way and they've never challenged those beliefs.
Yes, absolutely.
If I can give you a quick little example there. I heard a great story from Burt Goldman. He was known as the American monk, and he does the quantum jumping techniques. And what he was saying is, like, when it comes to limiting beliefs, there was a husband and a wife, and the one day the husband comes home and he sees his wife is making a roast. I'm just gonna give you the quick version. And he sees that she salt, peppers it, puts the olive oil all over it, and then before she puts it in the pan, she cuts off an inch to the left and an inch to the right. And he says, "Oh, that was weird. Sweetie, what were you doing there?" She's like, "Oh, that's how you make a roast." He's like, "All right, that's odd, but it could be worse. I could be dealing with a stranger person in my life. She just cuts a little bit off the ends. No big deal." So later on, her mother comes over and he's like, "Okay, hey, would you mind making us a roast?" And she's like, "Yeah, no problem." And then she does the same thing, oils it up, salts, peppers it, cuts an inch off the left, inch off the right. And he's like, "What is going on with this family? Why are they wasting all this meat or whatever?" And the woman's like grandmother is still alive. And he's like, "I'm getting to the bottom of this." And he calls up and he asks his wife when they're going to go visit for dinner and everything. And he calls her up and he says, "Hey, I was just wondering if maybe we could do a roast. I love roasts and I was hoping that we could do one for dinner." She's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. I love making a roast." So they go over. He's like, "Would you mind watching me cook it?" And she's like, "No, that would be love. I'd love the company." So he goes in the kitchen, olive oils it up, salts it, peppers it, puts it in the pan and puts it in the oven. He's like, "Wait a minute. Didn't you miss a step there?" And she's like, I don't think so. He's like, no. Yeah, you're supposed to cut an inch off the left and an inch off the right. And she's like, "Oh, I stopped doing that years ago." He's like, "Why?" "Oh, I got a bigger pan." So throughout our lives, we never challenged the idea that that's not how you make a roast. It was just the small box. She got a bigger box. She expanded her consciousness.
Yes, absolutely. And this really makes me think about everything we are learning from our parents, our environment, our childhood, and then we just bring it on without really rethinking it, as you mentioned, thinking it through, whether this is really what we want in life. But the question is, how do we start doing that? Because as you mentioned, we are not aware that we are doing it. And how can we actually change something that we are not even aware that we are doing?
Well, awareness is the key word there. You need to, if you understand that there are things that are holding you back, that there are certain beliefs that are disempowering, that's the first thing you need to do, is accept that they're there. From there, anytime you kind of come to a situation where you say, "I can't because," anytime you say, "I can't because," that is a telltale sign of a limiting belief. So if you want to get rid of that limiting belief, anytime you say, "I can't because," that's something that you should put it in your phone or something like that. Make a note about it, so when you have the free time, sit down and meditate on that and ask your questions. There's a system called BETCAR, and it stands for beliefs, emotions, thoughts, choices, actions, and reality. So basically the idea is, when you're a kid, you don't have associations, and relativity doesn't really exist to you yet because you don't have enough to work with. It's kind of trying to pin something to the air. You need a wall first. So basically your first 3 to 4 years of childhood is you developing the wall, so you have something to stick these things to, so you can associate them and give them meaning. So our thoughts don't really work yet. The only thing we can go with is our emotions. So say something somewhat traumatizing to some person might have been associated to something good in childhood for a baby or something like that. So maybe while somebody was screaming in another room, and crying, but the baby was being fed and was warm and stuff like that, it might associate screaming and crying to happiness, which obviously you can see in later in life, how that could damage somebody, how that could create an unhealthy mental, unhealthy mental health, right?
Yeah.
A little redundant, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So as you get older, those emotions turn into thoughts. And what we think creates the choices that we make. Our choices go on to lead to our actions. What we do as our actions creates our reality. So in order to go back, we start deciding on those I can't because situations, and that's just a belief. So we start to challenge those beliefs. And you start asking yourself questions like, well, who told me that? How do they know? Who told them that? How do they know? Is there any way that there's a possibility that this might be untrue? Is there ever a time in my life when the opposite was true? Am I working with all the evidence? Just breaking down and trying to figure out as many questions as you can that challenge the belief until you can find that, like the hole in the armor. And then you can start kind of working through it and be like, okay, well, if this belief isn't serving me, isn't working towards my betterment, my improvement, it's not making it so I'm having healthy relationships with other people, then there's no reason for me to hold on to it. So you do that by changing the belief in the first place. So you start asking yourself, if this is disempowering, what might be empowering? So in that situation, you could write down maybe all the things that are happening in your life that you don't like or you believe that aren't serving you. So all the worst parts of your life that you want to let go of. And I call this like a contrasting exercise. So you would just take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, you got your cons of your life, and then on the other side, you don't write the pros, because like anyone can do that. Instead, you take all of your negatives and you flip them. And you figure out what is the opposite, because if this is what I want less of in my life, what I want more of must be its opposite, or it's going to start pointing me in the right direction. So if what I want isn't exactly the opposite, I'm a lot closer to that. And I have another exercise, I'm giving you a lot of them today, called the monkey paw method. And there's an old like sci-fi horror story that talks about like a severed monkey, kind of monkey paw, where it's kind of like a rabbit's foot, but it kind of holds up like that. And every time you make a wish, one of the fingers goes down. But every time you make a wish, the wish is a little bit tainted, right? So you might order a wife or a husband or whatever, and they're the most attractive person that you've ever met, and you can't believe your good fortune that you get to spend your life with them. But within a couple days or weeks or months or whatever it is, you start realizing that they're abusive, or there's something about them that you didn't specify that you wanted them to also have a good personality, that you want to be treated with respect and all these things. So by understanding the opposite, you at least point yourself in the right direction. You course correct a little bit. And as you go, you get more and more detailed, where instead of like banking from one side to the other, you're kind of narrowing that focus. You're kind of funneling down and filtering in and really like zeroing in and getting that laser-like focus until you've gone through 100 different variations of it. You said like, well, I thought I wanted this, but it turns out after I got it, this was missing. So it turns out I don't want just this, I want this and this. And then this and this, until you realize that you're getting closer and closer to like your ideal life, just by constantly learning through failure again. And the only way you're going to do it is by actually putting this stuff into exercise and worrying less about like, what if I fail? Because failure is one of the greatest teachers that we have, because without failure, we just have the fear of failure. And then there's no progress. You don't learn anything. You're not taking any chances, but you're just expanding the fear. And like I said before, expanding fear just means that you're retracting and constricting all of your freedom of emotional and like spiritual, psychological movement. You're just kind of putting yourself into a smaller and smaller cage, which is just going to reduce your level of happiness, enjoyment, and ability to help others.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Alex. I am learning a lot, and I am convinced that also our audience is learning a lot. I would like to close our interview today by asking you, who are you serving and how can people contact you?
Absolutely. So right now, anyone I'm looking to serve is people who feel like they're stuck in their lives, who feel like their depression, their anxiety, their maybe complex post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction issues, or just general unhappiness or just looking for a way of expanding what they may have learned in the personal development area already, and just trying to figure out new ways and kind of things that you're not going to find in your standard law of attraction books, your Tony Robbins things, some things that might go a little bit deeper, that might be leaning more towards a spiritual realm, and kind of like activate that spiritual awakening. That did you know the word enthusiasm actually comes from the Greek word entheos, which means the God within?
No, I didn't.
So when you're enthusiastic about something, you're activating that divine spark within you that all of us have within us. So if anyone's interested in learning how to kind of wake that part of themselves up and finding that spiritual power and basically eliminating fear, disbelief, negativity, all that kind of stuff, that's the type of person that I'm looking to help.
I love that.
Looking to contact me, you can reach me at alex@mentallyrippedcoaching.com. That's mentally, RIPPED, coaching.com. And that's also my website, mentallyrippedcoaching.com.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you once again for all your knowledge, sharing it with us. I believe that it is extremely valuable. And in just a few minutes, I believe that you went through all the aspects that we should be working on in order to improve our lives. Thank you so much. Once again, I am honored to have you here with me.
Diane, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work that you're doing, because I'm sure so many people are getting so much value out of what you're doing and all the guests that you're bringing on, and just sharing a little bit more love and light into the world.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And for those of you listening to us, stay connected, because there is so much more to come.